Joe talks about Joe. And now, your host, Joe Slepsky.
Hello again, everybody. Welcome back to Joe on Joe. It's me, your host, Joe Slepsky. And man, I am so happy to bring this to you this week. This interview popped up out of nowhere. It came from me attending the Robo Toy Fest up in Burbank, which was awesome. And there I met the man, the myth, the legend, the father of Cold Slither, Michael Charles Hill. We hit it off. What a nice guy. And real quick, I'm like, let's get you on the show because Michael, if you're hearing this on, this episode drops on the 19th of June. It's just days away from the start of JoeFest. Michael's going to be there. So I wanted to get his interview in your ears ASAP. When you head to JoeFest this week and say hi to Michael, tell him you heard the show, of course. Hey, but more importantly, show him the love, but more than that, the respect that he deserves. You're going to hear in this episode all the things that he's laid his creative thumbprint on, and it's wild that it's taken us this long to bring him back into the fold. We start this conversation with talking about kind of like his first JoeFest, which was the Iowa JoeFest that he went to very recently, and that was kind of him dipping his toes into the fandom, and we take it from there, and we kind of cover his whole career and get to know Michael and really dig into his stuff, and we save the best for last with some Cold Slither talk at the end. I really enjoyed it. It was really nice of Michael to join us. Very grateful to him. Hopefully we can have him on again at some point. Maybe maybe we watch Cold Slither together. Who knows? I don't know. Listen, I'm just throwing that out there. That just came to me. Michael, if you hear this, that's no pressure at all. Not at all. Not at all any pressure for us to sit down together, watch Cold Slither together, and enjoy it. But no, it was great. It was really nice to have him on the show. So I'm very happy to present this to you guys today. If you love it, reach out on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram and let me know at Joe and Joe Pod. Send me an email to joeandjoepod@gmail.com. If you're going to JoeFest this weekend, let me know how it goes. Chime off. Keep me included on the Twitters. I'm not going to be there, so I'll be there with you in spirit. Everyone enjoy themselves, be safe, be happy, and have a great time. I also want you to show some love to our sponsors, the Movies in a Meal podcast. They're out there doing the good movie work every week. This last weekend, man, we saw Inside Out 2. What a great movie. So smart, so just emotionally intelligent. That's what that movie is. It's really fun for literally the whole family, adults as well as kids. Adults, it just gives you insight into everything. And I am positive that the Movies in a Meal podcast are talking about that this week. They should. It was a big movie. It was a lot of fun. It was really great. So, I can officially announce that I will be guaranteed to be. I mean, I guess, Lord willing and the creek don't rise. I will be at Comic-Con, San Diego Comic-Con. Joe and Joe podcast will be there. Not just Joe Slepsky. The Joe and Joe podcast will be there. I am on a podcasting panel. It's similar to the one we did out in the convention a couple weeks ago. Why am I blanking on the name? Very similar to that, but we're going to be hosting a podcast about if you want to start a podcast. I don't have any details right now. They haven't released it, but it has been confirmed. We will be down there. I talked about it a couple weeks ago with our friends Christian and David and Jim, and I think that's all that's going to be. I'm not sure else who's going to be on the dais, but we're going to be talking about starting podcasts. And so if you're in San Diego and you're hearing this and you're a listener, please come say hello. Please, please, please. That day, definitely I'll be wearing my Joe and Joe t-shirt. I don't know otherwise, but I'll probably be wearing variations of G.I. Joe shirts most of the weekend. But please say hello, just because I would love to meet you. But also, if you're a listener and you like, because I know this show has launched some podcasts. So if you're a listener and you're like, I want to do my own G.I. Joe podcast, but I'm not really sure how to do it, come to that panel. Details forthcoming, but put it on your radar. If you are heading to San Diego, it's at the end of July, the last weekend in July. If you're heading there, stop by and say hello. I would love to meet you guys. And spoiler alert, I'm going to be bringing some G.I. Joe board games with me because I'm going with my crew. Paul and Jeremiah are going to be there, and we're going to be there like Wednesday through Sunday. So we're going to be having a lot of G.I. Joe board games with us. We're going to be playing some board games. Maybe I'll bring it in. We'll find a game table at the gaming table. Maybe we'll play it inside the convention itself. How exciting would that be? So, so I appreciate you guys. I appreciate our sponsors. And man, do I appreciate Michael Charles Hill. You guys are going to love this conversation. So we're going to pick it up. Michael's talking about, his first toe dipped back into the convention circuit. So enjoy, and everyone have a great, safe, happy, and healthy JoeFest 2024.
It was my first Joe convention event. And having only done one before that, which was Transformers in Toronto, it was smaller than what I was expecting, although I shouldn't have had any expectations whatsoever, having not done any of these things before. But it felt more like a high school reunion.
Yeah.
Convention, and what I imagine JoeFest is going to be like. I used to do San Diego Comic-Con, so I know what that's like.
Sure.
But yeah, we had talked, once I did the Transformer convention, I decided that I'd like to do more of these, and I started contacting some event organizers, introducing myself, letting them know I was available if they were interested. I had done that about 10 years earlier and never got a response from anybody.
Yeah.
Assumed that, the small contributions I made to both franchises had no impact whatsoever, and that nobody was really interested in having me there, that, all they wanted to see were the voiceover actors, who, of course, wouldn't have had a job if it wasn't for.
So you said small contributions, and yet you say that, but you gave us Cold Slither, you gave us Starscream's Ghost, you also introduced us to the Coil. You worked on RoboCop, you worked on Cops. Michael, for your, in your words, small contribution, you left a really big footprint.
Well, thank you. At the time, to me, they were just, they were just writing assignments, and always tried to, do a good job, but just deliver a script that was fun for me to write and would hopefully make for a fun episode. I hadn't, and this is true for, especially at Sunbow, for all of us who work there, we had no expectation that any of this stuff would have an afterlife.
Yeah. Hear that a lot. Yeah.
Because we had worked on other shows before, maybe they last a season, they canceled, and some new shiny thing would come along, and that's what people would be interested in.
Well, we're gonna circle back and get to Cold Slither. That's gonna be the meat of this conversation, because that's your moneymaker. But let's start where you began. It looked like you went to a UFC film school, or I'm sorry, USC film school. Is that correct?
A number of classes there, plus UCLA film school. Then there was this great little, I'm probably being a little too harsh when I describe it as a fly-by-night film school, right in Hollywood, on Hollywood Boulevard, and it was called Sherwood Oaks Experimental College.
Okay.
Some of my best memories of film school are associated with that place. The guy who ran it, his name was Gary Shutset, and his brother was Ronald Shutset, one of the original co-writers of Alien. And so we thought. And Gary managed to get great guests to come in every week or to teach classes. So, screenwriting class with Paul Schrader and John Milius, and directing classes with
classes with Paul Schrader and John Milius.
And unbeknownst to me, in that John Milius class, and we didn't meet at the time, Flint Dille.
Oh,
I think I was sitting in the front, he was sitting in the back, so we never, it was like a year or two later before we met.
oh, that's wild. And what was your first professional writing job?
That would be Dragon Slayer.
Love it.
And and this ties into Flint. Flint's family owned the rights to Buck Rogers. But Flint and his agent were peddling Buck Rogers around to the different animation studios. And they all passed on it, including Ruby Spears. But they liked Flint, and they hired Flint to write for Mr. T. And Flint and I had a writers group that used to meet every Monday night. And we'd bring in 10 pages of a script we were working on, and we'd pass it out to everybody so that the following Monday, that would be the topic of discussion. It's the 10 pages we brought in on Monday. Of course, we could even more. But I get a phone call from Flint, and at the time, I was working in film production, doing mostly, I was working as a production manager or producer, mostly in commercials. And Flint called me up and said, "Hey, how'd you like to get paid for writing?" I said, "Sure." And so he introduced me to the story editor of Dragon Slayer. And it lasted one season. We did 13 episodes, but I wrote 4 of the 13. And decided that I liked not getting up at 4:30 in the morning and have to be on location or on soundstage at 6. And
Sounds cushy. Was Don Bluth involved in the production of the show? Because he did the work on the video game.
As far as I know, had no involvement on the show. But obviously, the show was modeled after
Yeah.
the video game, because it could be every act break would be for the audience to choose which direction the story would pivot on.
How would I remember that from as a kid? How did they? Was it just then? Obviously, they would just say, "Oh, you chose this way," but they would give you the illusion of choice. Is that what it was? Yeah. For listeners, if you're not familiar with Dragon's Lair, there was also that one in a game called Space Ace that were one of the, because it was really like live, beautiful Don Bluth animation video games. So yeah, I remember that as a cartoon. Fabulous. And I saw that you worked on. You have a credit for the Bozo Show.
Yeah, that's a wild story.
Please tell it, because is this Bozo out of Chicago?
It is.
Oh man, I was a Chicago kid, and
All right.
I got a lot of Bozo history. So please relay your story.
So, as a producer at Sunbow, in addition to the shows that we were assigned, we would also get thrown a lot of projects at us that just sort of came under our job title. Extra writing assignments that we didn't get paid for. We got paid for writing separately for writing scripts for the shows, but everything else was like, well, that's your job. So, Claster was the distributor of I think all the shows we were doing at Sunday. They also were a distributor of the Bozo Show. And in some markets, and I don't know which ones other than Chicago, every day they would show one act of one episode on the Bozo Show.
Yep.
And Bozo would have to introduce and set up what you were about to see. And the following day, then he would tell you what you saw yesterday and what you're going to see today. And I had to write Bozo's dialogue.
Amazing.
So, excuse me?
That's amazing.
Yeah. So, at the time, Flint and I and all of our colleagues, we wanted to be screenwriters. We were working on, you know, separately scripts that we hope to sell to the studios and make movies out of. And we all wanted to be get that opportunity to join the Writers Guild. Now, most animation studios were not signatory to the Writers Guild, and that included Sunbow. But lo and behold, Larry Harmon Productions, which owned the Bozo Show, was. So I actually became a member of the Writers Guild for writing Bozo the Clown's dialogue, which I never would imagine was the way I was going to.
That's actually an amazing inroad story. Yeah, we were huge Bozo fans. Bozo used to give away G.I. Joe toys, which makes sense that all checks out now. That there was a relationship with Sunbow, and I do remember that they would do segments of introduce it, because I know G.I. Joe and Transformers, like, they would bracket the Bozo showing, at least when I was coming up. You also contributed to the GoBots as well as Transformers, so you've written for both GoBots and Transformers.
That's true. I wrote one episode, and it wasn't really the kind of experience I was hoping for.
Yeah.
Jeff Siegel and Kelly Ward were the story editors, and they rewrote my script enough to change the title to the point where I didn't quite recognize it. But I will, in their defense, I was still new to the animation game. And so I was still kind of learning my way around it. And also the whole robot thing wasn't fun.
Mm-hmm.
So when I wrote my first episode of Transformers, which I did as a freelancer when Marvel was handling everything, Sunbow West didn't even exist. I forget how many premises the story editors wanted me to submit. But it was at least 3, maybe at most 6. And what always happens to me is, I spend a lot of time, working on all the ideas, and then I'd be like one short. And then I'd come up with like a throwaway idea, one I hadn't really thought a lot about or developed very much. It might only be a couple paragraphs long as opposed to a fairly detailed page length premise with beginning, middle, and end. And what used to happen to me a lot was the throwaway ideas were the ones that always got picked. So my throwaway idea was basically resubmitting the GoBots premise. And that's the one they picked, and that became the Gambler.
Oh, great.
And with the Gambler, the story was introduced a bounty hunter. And when I went through the list of all the Autobots and Decepticons, there really wasn't a character that fit the bill. So I made up my own Transformer because nobody told me that I couldn't. And that's how DevCon came to being. And unbeknownst to me, he became a fan favorite.
That's really cool.
Then almost 40 years after the fact, Hasbro finally acknowledged him and came out last summer with his own figure.
They did. Oh, that's amazing. That's really great. How many of those figures do you have now?
I just have the one. You have a couple of, I guess there was some third-party knockoffs that people were making.
They do a lot of that. Yeah, the Transformers world has a whole lot of that. Yep.
I have a couple of those, but legally they couldn't couldn't call them dead.
Correct. What I've been told by a friend of the show and an absolute Transformers expert is they use those third parties a lot as kind of like test kitchens, and they allow them to make those knockoff Transformers. They can't use any of the names, any of the copyrighted names or anything. But when they come up with a really novel way to transform the figure, that's when Hasbro steps in and goes, okay, great, we'll take that. Like, you did all the R&D work. We like the way this new figure you did works, so we'll just take it from you. And there's nothing they can do because it's all copywritten. Yeah.
Well, that's cool.
Yeah. Well, that same Transformers expert, friend of the show, Matt, he has a question for you about Transformers. And he is a massive Transformers fan. So push up your nerd glasses and answer this. In Starscream's brigade, exactly how did the World War II era fighter end up as a space shuttle?
Yeah. Just kind of just made it up. And this ties back into John Miller's. They sent me every, how many months it was, Hasbro would always send me a list of new figures they were going to be introducing. And I know the dates that they would hit the shelves. So they wanted me to start introducing these characters into the episodes so that they would coincide with the release of the figure. So when I got the combiners, and I looked at them, and I thought, well, the Combaticons were the most interesting to me, especially Brutican. So I snagged that for myself. And all I had to work off of were model sheets and names. They'd already given them that. So I decided that I was going to, because I don't know that we had done this before, but I wanted to create an origin story for them. And I remembered this story that John Milius told us in the screenwriting class. And he said that, ideas aren't shit. Everybody's, got an idea for a screenplay and they want to keep it secret. They don't want to tell people. Well, I'll tell you right now, I'm going to go home and I'm going to I'm going to write a script about Guadalcanal. And it's going to be better than anything you guys do. So that story always stuck with me. And so that was how I came up with the intro of Starscream's Brigade. And it had to be World War II era vehicles.
Sure.
Had to be able to transform into what Hasbro had already decided what they were going to look like.
That's really cool. That's an amazing connection. I'm really glad we asked that. Similarly, you created Starscream's Ghost, which is awesome. It's such a great episode. And it basically confirms that, if we weren't already sure with, the Matrix and all that stuff, that if ghosts are your soul in the afterlife, that the Transformers have souls.
Yeah, I don't know that I was thinking about that. All I know is that I had a conversation with Flint, whose office was like literally on the other side of the wall from mine. And we were talking about the movie, and I don't know if the movie had come out yet or not, or he had, his final draft was completed and he was going to animation. But he told me, he said, Starscream's not dead. And I went, oh, I can work with that. So that's how Ghost in the Machine came about in creating Starscream's Ghost. Now, I kind of forgot that I had done that until last summer when I was in Toronto. A lot of members of the DFCon staff and fans came up to me and said, "Oh, and you created Starscream's Ghost." And my first thought was, "Did I? What's Starscream's Ghost?" And so there is another episode called Starscream's Ghost that um, seems to. I had to watch it the other day. Now I had a conversation with Flint on last Sunday, and he confirmed that I created Starscream's Ghost.
Mm-hmm.
But what was confusing to me is apparently the episode called Starscream's Ghost aired before Ghost of the Machine. So I never felt comfortable until Flint said, confirmed it. I never felt comfortable taking credit for it.
Interesting.
Um, so, but I watched both episodes the other day, and the Starscream's Ghost episode doesn't seem to bear any relationship to Ghost in the Machine. It doesn't feel like it's a prequel. It doesn't feel like it's a sequel.
Mm-hmm.
So the only thing I can think of is I know I wrote Ghost in the Machine before Starscream's Ghost was written. Was that the writer on that episode, I think it's the only one she wrote, and she looked down the list of shows that were in production, and she read about Ghost in the Machine. She liked the idea of doing a story with Starscream's Ghost.
Oh, neat. It's really a collaborative process. You worked on Cops, you worked on Centurions. Both series are awesome. Centurions was an absolute great cartoon. Cops was a lot of fun. RoboCop was a lot of fun. You kind of traipsed through these very 80s action filmy cartoons. You really put a footprint on all of those. Any outstanding memories from working on something like Cops or Centurions or the RoboCop series?
Um, Not really. I think on one of those shows, I think it was Cops. Carl Masick was one of the story editors, and Carl and I were, I think, had just become friends. I know Carl had his own video distribution company, which the name of escapes me right at the moment, that specialized in doing English language versions of Japanese anime. And I know I wrote at least one for him, and that was Space Adventure Code. But I don't remember if I did that before Cops or if I did it after.
Mm-hmm.
See, it was, I think that was post Sunbow, so I was just kind of in my freelance mode and just.
IMDb has that as before. That actually has that listed as one of your first works.
I was still in LA when I did that. Now I remember I had just come off the Turtles. I was living in Northampton, Massachusetts, and that's when I was doing the anime features.
Yeah. So let's move on to what the people are here for. Some hot GI Joe talk, Michael. You worked on Ninja Holiday, Into Your Tent, I Will Silently Creep, and of course Cold Slither. Ninja Holiday. Were you drawing on like Bloodsport or Enter the Dragon or that kind of thing? Were you a fan of that?
Dragon. And the story of that script is that as a producer of, well, both shows, but I was a producer on G.I. Joe at the time. Buzz was a story editor, so he worked with all the writers in, they're pitching their ideas and working with them in the outline and the script. And then the handoff would take place to me. And so because we were doing 65 half hours a season, and we had deadlines that we had to meet for airing new episodes in the fall. It was like an assembly line. I don't know that I want to quite say it was a sausage factory, but every Friday I would have to send a brand new script over to Marvel and Van Nuys so that they could assign a storyboard artist on Friday afternoon or Friday evening so they could get started on the weekend. So usually on a Wednesday, I would, knowing what script I was supposed to be getting in on Friday, I would call the writer and just check in with him, see how it's going, make sure I'm going to have the script on Friday. And this one particular week, it was a script by Jerry Conway and his then wife Carla. And Jerry's famous line was always, "Well, do you want it good or do you want it on time?" I would say, "Well, I'd like that both." So this particular week, he wasn't going to have the script on time. So on Thursday night, I stayed in the office overnight and I wrote a brand new script from scratch so that I would have something to give to Marvel on Friday afternoon. And that's how Ninja Holiday came.
Wow.
I didn't plot it out. I didn't discuss it with Buzz. I just made it up as I went along.
That's crazy, and especially with all the you always assume there's such consideration and all the careful planning when it comes to animation. Did when you did that, did you just decide what characters you use? Because notably, you used Sergeant Slaughter. He didn't have a ton of episodes with him, but he was a great fit for that. And you had like sci-fi, and I think Dial Tone was in that one. Was there any caveat as to what characters to use, or was it just you picked and chose?
Just pick and chose, yeah. Because Hasbro didn't really get that involved in specific episodes.
Okay.
At some point, they obviously got copies of the script after the fact, because the Starscream's Brigade, I get a fax telling me that Hasbro wants me to change. The original title was called 30 Seconds Over Megatron. And Hasbro didn't like that. They wanted to change the title because it sounded too much like a war movie. And my immediate response to Carol Weitzman, who's the VP in New York, was, "Have they seen the show?" So I could not change their minds. So I just picked another war film title,
Mm-hmm.
twist on it, and so it became Starscream Brigade.
Well, Ninja Holiday's a classic, but before we finally wrap with talking about Cold Slither and get onto that topic, Into Your Tent I Will Silently Creep is a great fun episode, cross country, trying to find his radio. But you introduced the Coil.
Yes.
What was the plan behind that? Was there a plan? Was that purposely setting up for a season 3? Was that setting up to try to tie into what they thought the movie was going to be at the time? What can you tell us about the Coil?
And Buzz and I just did a podcast about this a couple of days ago. The thing of it is, until recently, I kind of forgot all about the Coil. Although, over the last 10 years, when I'd stumble across, something about G.I. Joe, and I would see people making references to the Coil, and I kept thinking, well, that sounds really good. Invention called the Coil or CoilCon or something. And so then I started thinking, God, I think I might have created that. I had a memory of writing a scene of these characters in like some, ancient ruins of a castle in hooded cloaks and candles and like this secret ceremony. So to back up, originally I used to supervise all the recording sessions for G.I. Joe. And Wally Burr's studio was on the second floor in this building, and at the top of the stairs was this waiting room, which was also kind of the green room. And that's where all the actors would hang out. It was really small. So you get 10 or 12 guys in there and gals. it would get really crowded. But it was fun for me because, working with Scatman Crothers and Chuck McCann, Rodier, and
Legends, absolute legends. Yeah.
people that I grew up with watching in movies and TV shows, and then thinking like, oh, I'm sitting 3 feet away from it, and they all had great stories to tell, and I would just listen. So I always felt kind of bad for Keone Young because he would, Storm Shadow didn't always have a lot of dialogue in the episode he would show up in. So one day I said to Keone, I said, I'm going to write an episode just for you, Storm Shadow. Now, I don't remember what that episode was about or what the title was, but I pitched it to Buzz, and somehow or another, it morphed into something else. And I tried to retain as much. I think Buzz and I had a disagreement about the story in general or how to tell the story. Maybe there weren't enough Joes in it. I don't remember. So I tried to retain as much as my original idea as possible, and I gave it to Buzz. And then I went on vacation in Europe with my wife and 7-month-old baby, and I was gone for 3 weeks. And when I came back, Buzz had done a significant amount of rewriting and changed the title. And then I decided that Buzz should share the screen credit with me.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't happy about it, but Buzz was the story of it. So, but what was left out of that, and I'm assuming, was part of my original idea, was the Coil, which basically was born out of the idea that Cobra Commander was really not happy about being displaced as the leader of Cobra. So he was going to, within the bowels of Cobra, create this secret society and gather as many people as he can to support him. And basically, the plan was to overthrow Serpentor. And my thinking at the time was that I would write the miniseries for next season, and it would be focused strictly on. Now, where my memory gets really, really fuzzy, and this is why I wanted Buzz to be on the podcast with me the other day, was that he loved the idea of the Coil. And so we were knocking around some different ideas, and I ended up writing a whole new pitch for the whole season 3.
Mm.
It was very detailed, but somehow or another it morphed into a crime syndicate led by Comax and Zane, which I have no memory of. Now, I'm 99% sure I saved hard copies of everything that I wrote at Sunbow, and they are in a box in the storage unit in Vermont, which is where I grew up and where I moved to after I was done working with the Turtles because it was so close. And when I came back to LA, I just packed up my house and put everything in storage. And I haven't been there since. So one day I hope to find all the original material that I wrote that we pitched to Hasbro, and then Hasbro decided, maybe we don't really want to do a third season after that. So that was the end of the Coil, and I had no idea that other people were inspired by it.
Yep.
Did their own version of it.
Well, we need that season 3 outline. We need to get a fan-made Kickstarter project going and do a mini series that kind of wraps all that up. That would be amazing. So let's get you up to Vermont. I'll drive, Michael. We'll do it. So speaking of inspiration, To set the scene, I don't know, this was probably 6 years ago. I was knocking around some ideas for my thing, for my little podcast here, and I had some thoughts about things I wanted to do and some kind of fun projects and how could I do something a little different. And the idea jumped in my head of, man, one of my absolute favorite all time episodes is Cold Slither. It's so much fun. I loved it when I was a kid. I loved it when I found it again in my mid-20s when G.I. Joe was on reruns, and I got the DVDs. And I absolutely fell in love with it again when I was doing this show and we covered it and reviewed it. Absolutely loved it. It's such a fun concept. It absolutely encapsulates what was going on in music at the time, and has so much fun with the characters. Uses the characters that exist to tell the story without with using their characteristics. Like the stuff that they would be up to absolutely tell that really, really wonderful mind control story. So that then inspired me here to do the Cold Slither Behind the Rock, which doesn't exist without your wonderful work. So Cold Slither, the episode, thank you for your inspiration, sir. What was your inspiration to do Cold Slither?
Well, first I want to say Cold Slither Behind the Rock is really absolutely loved it. Jason Morell, I don't know if you know him or not.
Yep.
The one, it was just a few months ago, who sent me a link and said, hey, you might want to check this out. And I was just blown away at how great it was, how professional it was, and how real it was. Like it was, you're documenting something that really exists in the world. Like you took it seriously, and yet still it was a mockumentary. So I hats off to you.
Thank you. That means the world to me. I will dine out on that for many, many moons.
All right. So Cold Slither, another throwaway idea, one I hadn't really thought out much. And basically, its roots were in a Pied Piper story. And I knew it was just going to be kind of outrageous and kind of over the top, silly. And the truth of the matter is, I was not a fan, I've never been a fan of heavy metal music. So I was fun. And the whole idea of subliminal messages, was kind of a thing back in the 80s that people were convinced were real. So I just, it's just a nutty episode, and I kind of went with it. And I really didn't think that anybody would like it. I mean, I think Steve Gerber was the story editor in the first season, and Steve and I didn't know each other beforehand. And so he was working with a lot of his friends from the comic book world that he would bring in. And Steve was kind of overwhelmed with all the scripts he was working. And I think he finally told Flint, all right, we'll let Michael write one, but you have to be the story. And so that's how I got to writing the first G.I. Joe script. And I guess Flint liked it enough, the nuttiness of it, that
it seems like something that Steve Gerber would like. Knowing him only as a fan, and knowing his sensibilities, Howard the Duck, and all that stuff, it seems like Cold Slither 100% would be up his alley.
So I write the script, and then when we get to the scenes where there's supposed to be a song, I just wrote in drop song here or something like that. Because at the time we were doing Gem, and I knew they had a couple of songwriters that they had hired to write all the music for it. So, later, even when I wrote my one and only Gem script, I would do the same thing. I would just put the placement of where the song was supposed to go, and I didn't have to think about it. So one day, I think like once a month, Tom Griffin and Joe Bacall, guys who own Sunday, would fly out to LA and they drop by the office and say hello. Joe comes into my office and he says, a great script. Where's the song? I said, what do you mean by it? He said, well, it was your idea. Have this song. I expect you to write it for me. I said, I'm not going to pay someone else to write for it. It's your idea. So this was like a Friday afternoon. So it was like, oh, crap. So I went home over the weekend and just started writing down ideas and running them by my wife, who was a songwriter herself at the time, but she wrote English lyrics for Brazilian songs.
Okay.
She wrote for Mendes, a lot of stuff you can do. So she liked what I was doing, and then we had a piano in our apartment, and I said, "Well, this is kind of music I'm kind of hearing. Maybe we can just do kind of like we'll do a little demo tape." And so I turned it in. Joe was happy. He says, "But we've already got Rob Walsh. We'll get Rob Walsh to write." So. But my intention was to write a bad heavy metal song, because in my opinion, they were all bad. Mm. And I didn't know until years later that I had completely failed at that. Because I now know that a lot of fans of the show and a lot of fans of the song, it's a big deal to them.
It's a catchy tune. I mentioned this to you when we met at the convention last week. That song my guys who recorded it in Chicago, I don't believe they're together as a group anymore, but Matt Teese, big huge shout out to Matt who organized all that. They played it live in bars around Chicago. So they would be playing regular good old fashioned rock and roll, and then in the middle of their set, because they had rehearsed Cold Slither so much for that Behind the Rock recording, they would drop in Cold Slither, and 100% people in the crowd would recognize. There'd be one dude, middle-aged guy, like us, in the back who would raise his hand and go like, G.I. Joe, or, something like that. Everyone else would just dig it because it's a fun song, but they would always get one person in the back who would 100% recognize what the song was. So you did well with that, sir.
Yeah, and I did notice via Bandcamp that a lot of these garage bands would doing covers.
I've seen videos where they've done full cosplay as the Dreadnoks performing it, and it's fabulous. Absolutely, it's really, really great.
And so, back to Assembly Required last year, one of Brian's friends, I'll give him a shout out. His name is Chad Baker. He works he's a copywriter at an advertising agency in Des Moines. Big G.I. Joe fan. And so he wrote some extra verses, brilliant lyrics, that I would have thought I'd written.
Sure.
They're the connective tissue with what I wrote, and they recorded that version so that on the Friday night, the opening night, they could hand out demo CDs. This kind of blew me away and was a very surreal experience.
That's really neat. I've seen some custom action figures, but I don't believe no one's done full on, you can buy it at mass market action figures, correct? They haven't done that yet.
Not yet. But I don't know how reliable it is, but over the weekend, and maybe last March at TFCon, some people who I sense might be in the know have suggested that something is going to be coming down the pipe.
Yeah, it has to happen because it's. I mean, it's just absolutely the fact. I've seen a lot of the branding and a lot of the actual, the Hasbros of the world and the Super Sevens of the world. They've mentioned it in passing. It's 100% on their radars. I think we'll be getting something very cool very soon. I think that's really great. It is such it's just such a fun episode, and you were doing it in real time. So if you didn't like heavy metal, or well, actually, it's more hair metal really than heavy metal, although
It's the thing that used to, part of the inspiration is, when I first got to Hollywood, you could drive up the strip, you had the Whiskey A Go Go. And so all the bands that I grew up with in the 60s who had played all these places, those places were being replaced with these, big hair, makeup wearing, rock and rollers who, they knew 3/4, good for them. Just the kind of music I just didn't care for that. So I was really, really, really just trying to poke fun at that.
well, I think you certainly did, because at the end, the GI Joe team, previously heretofore unknown to be musical performers, take the stage and rock the house. So
That was like a last minute throwaway idea that just I hadn't planned out. And of course, I was just playing off average white band, and that's average Joe band, and I needed a way to get out of the episode, and that seemed like a good idea.
I think it's a perfect out. I really think it's a perfect out, and it's just there's a lot of layers to that. There's a lot of beats to that show. There's just beats. There's fun beats. The director's fun. Shooting the music video is fun.
And I had worked on a lot of music videos.
Oh, you did. In what capacity?
Usually, like a production manager or a producer. I would say mostly commercials, but I did short films, music videos, industrials. And the whole idea that the director was wearing a safari jacket, that seemed to be required attire in the late 70s of all these directors that I had worked with.
Mm-hmm.
They drew that from my experience. And they'd have jeans that were ironed so that the tree stand, and they all had their safari jackets and their yellow tinted sunglasses. And in fact, I don't know if you're going to be able to see this. Brian, in addition to this, had created some brand new card backs.
Oh yes, those are great. Well, yeah. Now, this is just audio only for the episode, but it's a really nice looking updated card back for what would be the Z-Man Cold Slither.
So Chad Baker wrote new file cards for them. So we have Strummer, Tickles, and Sticks.
They look awesome. Oh, and the legend, the director.
Then what he also did, unbeknownst to me, was then he did one for Captain Claymore.
That's great. So that's what we're going to segue into now too, is Claymore.
He recreated the file card that I created for Claymore, which up until recently most people thought Larry Hama had written.
So you created Claymore for the Special Missions Brazil set.
Yes. And that was another one of those things. I get a fax from Hasbro, and they tell me that they're doing a Toys R Us exclusive, and they are repainting 4 existing characters, and they're making a 5th character out of spare parts.
Mm-hmm.
And so, again, it was my responsibility, because I was producer of G.I. Joe, to come up with a name for him, come up with his file card. And, oh, by the way, we're also going to include an audio tape to go with it. And we want you to write the script for the story. So, and it didn't have a name. So I created Claymore. His birth name is my great-grandfather's name. His birthplace is my hometown in Vermont. And I came up with Special Mission Brazil. You know, so that sort of ties into my, my wife at the time, because she was writing. She had lived in Brazil, spoke fluent Portuguese, and we were spending a lot of time with Sergio Mendes and his wife at his house. And so I just thought, well, Special Mission Brazil, that sounds really cool.
Oh, that's great.
So that's how that came about.
That's really neat. And I love that you named him after your grandfather, and use those personal touches are always, they always ring more authentic. Even when Larry would talk about it, like named it after an old friend of his, a soldier friend or a guy he grew up. It just adds an authenticity to it. I think that when it just comes from whole cloth, it usually lacks a little bit. Did you write? Like, did you do all the sound effects? Did you incorporate that, or did you kind of just give them the script and then Hasbro put together the audio recording, or how involved were you with the recording of it?
No involvement whatsoever, which surprised me. So when I wrote the script, I decided I was going to write it as a radio drama. Mm-hmm. No scene description, just voiceover, dialogue, voiceover, narration, and sound effects. And they went off and did their own. And I didn't actually listen to it. Well, first of all, Hasbro used to send us everything, but they never sent me a Special Mission Brazil box set.
How dare they?
Yeah. But I mean, they sent us everything else. I mean, they sent us a USS Flag, and we used that coffee table, our lounge in our office.
Could use that as an actual pool floaty.
Yeah. So, and again, it was just one of those things I sort of forgot about. And in fact, I don't know, maybe before I went to Assembly Required, maybe after, somebody had posted the audio of the tape onto YouTube. And I thought, I'm pretty sure I wrote that, but I have no memory of what the story was. So let me go listen to it. So I started listening to it, and my first response is, oh my God, this is horrible. They didn't use the real actors. The direction sucks. But then when I started listening to lines of dialogue, I went, oh yeah, I wrote that. But there'd be a line in there that would be a line that I would cannibalize oftentimes in other scripts. Mm-hmm. So recently, I decided to rewrite that script as an animation script.
Oh, cool.
And the only thing I had to work off of was listen to the audio tape, because I didn't have my original hard copy of the script. So I just transcribed everything, but wrote it, as I say, as an animation script with detailed scene descriptions and, characters, in animation scripts, you have to write everything that happens on the screen. So if you've got somebody running towards camera or away from camera, or entering from off screen, you have to write all that stuff in. Mm-hmm. So I rewrote it as an animation screen and fleshed it out a little bit more, still keeping within the parameters of the story itself. But I had a great time doing that. And I actually had copies of those available last Sunday. But so it's called Special Mission Brazil Redux, as a homage to Coppola and Apocalypse Now Redux.
It's that Milius connection. I love it. I think that so this episode is we're originally dropping this the week of JoeFest 24. So listeners, you're hearing this, you need to go talk to Michael, hear these stories, give him love, and he's got all these great scripts that you can pick up at his booth. Do you have a full booth there, or are you just going as a guest?
I think I'm being sponsored by another guy, but we have two separate tables.
Okay. So you'll have all that promo stuff, the file cards and stuff that people can purchase from you, right?
Unfortunately, I've been lucky enough since I've been here to access four of the six Transformer scripts I wrote. I'll have those plus the voiceover dialogue scripts.
Oh, cool!
When they came into the studio, I have not been able to find a copy of Cold Slither. So the only actual G.I. Joe script I have would be the new version of Special Mission Reserve that I did.
Well, it's all worthwhile. So go pick up this really cool stuff. Make sure Michael knows that we are so happy that you've stepped back into the G.I. Joe ring and are now making appearances. Because, I mean, this last hour we've talked about absolute literal milestones for both G.I. Joe and Transformers, frankly. You've really left a big footprint on a lot of these programs. I think more than you probably realize. It sounds like.
Oh yeah, like I say, for years it was just something I had done once upon a time.
Yeah.
I was an editor at DC Comics. I was a creative director at Mirage Studios. So many Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
What books did you edit at DC?
At DC, they hired me to be the editor of the collected edition, and I did a couple of the hardcover archive books.
Oh, which ones?
First, detective book and I got Senator Leahy. He was a senator of my home state. I got him to write the introduction for me, and I think the first book I worked on, I did a bunch of Sandmans and Robo and Animal Man and ton of stuff. But the first book I think I worked on, which I didn't take any credit for because it was started by somebody else, was Watchmen.
Oh, cool.
So I was working for Dick Giordano and then Joe Orlando, who was on the next floor.
Both legends.
Stole me from Dick to become his senior editor in his department with the special projects.
Mm-hmm.
Bunch of different things. Joe was offering a lot more money than Dick was paying. And but part of my responsibilities as a senior editor in special projects was I was also the editor of the Looney Tunes magazine and the Tiny Toons magazine.
Neat.
And edited Batman joke books and just a wide variety of stuff that he did in special projects.
I could dig into all that stuff for another hour. This has been awesome, Michael. You're really great. I really appreciate you giving our listeners your time and your expertise and your knowledge.
It's for me. It's it is mind blowing. 40 years later, it's like I've been not even rediscovered, just sort of discovered. And, just for all those years in between, I just assumed that anything I did with those franchises, I was happy that they had an afterlife, but I just assumed that, like I said, my small contribution had no impact whatsoever.
Well, I'm happy that you were wrong. Let's put it that way. I'm happy to tell you were very wrong, my friend. So, listeners, go meet Michael at JoeFest. If you're hearing this after JoeFest, just follow him. Are you on? Are you active on any of the socials?
Yeah, I'm on Facebook as Michael Charles Hill and on Instagram as Cold Slither 01.
Okay, well, find him, follow him, and send him some TLC. And we'll probably follow up this episode with a rerun of Cold Slither Behind the Rock, just in case people haven't heard that yet. And this has been a real pleasure, a real highlight for me.
Even if you have heard it, listen to it again.
You heard it out of the man's mouth. Well, now you know more about Cold Slither, more about Michael Charles Hill, and Joeing is half the battle.
Speaking of that, I wrote the Joe PSA as well.
Did you really? Like all of them? Or most?
You know, I thought I wrote all of them, but Tim Finn, who I respect as a G.I. Joe historian, says that somebody who I didn't know at Hasbro claims that he wrote the first 4.
Okay.
So I take him at his word.
So you don't think you're not saying you didn't come up with the phrase "now you know" and knowing is half the battle?
No, I thought I did because I thought I wrote all those, and I convinced myself because at the time NBC had a nationwide "the more you know." So I thought I had just kind of liberated that idea. And knowing, now we know. And knowing is half the battle is just, that's an old phrase that's been around for decades. So I thought I was the one who came up with that. But according to Tim Finn, this other guy claims he's the one. So I'm not going to dispute it.
Well, you know what? I appreciate that integrity. But I say we get you guys in a Thunderdome and figure it out.
Yeah. So it wasn't until probably the mid 2000s that a friend of mine's 12-year-old son had told me that the PSAs had become a thing.
Oh yeah.
What fans were doing with them and posting them on YouTube.
Yep.
And I also believe. Somebody asked me if I was offended, and I thought, not at all. This is.
We did a fun one for our when we did the G.I. Joe movie. I had an audio. The real story is I had an audio drop very early on, and I needed to cover it in the audio because we did a live recording with a bunch of people. And so instead of kind of doing one of those, hey listeners, we screwed up, we said had fun, and we brought in Bill Ratner to record Flint, and we did a PSA with just Bill Ratner, kind of creeping out the joke was that he was in our living room and he was creeping out my wife. She was like, Bill, why are you in my living room? But he was playing Flint, and it was a lot of fun. So that's also inspiration from you. Everything you do inspires me.
Thank you.
All right. Well, Michael, now you Joe, and Joeing is half the battle.